Okay, hello everybody.
Oh, sorry. This is not working for me in the show. Hang on a second. There we go. Stop sharing. My apologies.
No worries.
Winifred.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Winifred DeJohnny, and I am the chair of the Wetlands Committee of the Point San Pedro Road Coalition. And the coalition is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It represents the interests of the residents and neighborhood associations along the Point San Pedro Road Corridor in East San Rafael. And I encourage everybody to visit our website when you have a chance at sprcoalition.org. And you can learn more about the organization's mission. We have a lot of committees and activities. And if you're interested in getting involved or volunteering for any of them, you can write to us through the contact tab there as well. And there's also a link on the homepage to our YouTube channel section where the recordings of previous coalition programs can be found, including many from the Wetlands Committee. So I hope you can avail yourself of that resource. It's really wonderful. There's a lot of great information and historical context to this area. And so tonight, this is a wetlands program event, and we're delighted to have Liz Lewis here to talk about the Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas 2. She's the project coordinator, and she has been involved with the project for several years and is the survey leader for blocks that cover Peacock Gap, China Camp, McNair's Park, so wetlands and areas within our community in close proximity to our community. So there's a very personal aspect to what she's going to talk about. But the Atlas is a very comprehensive 4-year volunteer-led survey of the breeding birds throughout Marin County. And what it's doing is it's following up on an initial atlas done in the 1970s, whose results were published in this wonderful encyclopedic fashion. And so this second atlas is serving as a comparison in the breeding bird populations and their distribution. And we'll have time for questions after Liz's presentation. So if you have questions you want to put in the chat when she's talking, you can do that, or you can wait till she's finished and you can raise your hand and we'll just take questions in person. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Liz.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Winifred. Good to see all of you tonight. So let's get started with our presentation. Let's see. Everybody, let's see, put it into, all right, there we go. Everyone can see my screen. Okay. Well, great. Thanks, Winifred, for that background on the Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas. Really appreciate this opportunity to meet with you all tonight. As Winifred mentioned, this is the second atlas. The first one was completed, the field work was completed almost 40 years ago. The main goal of this second atlas is to document the distribution of breeding birds across Marin County. And of course, none of this work would be possible without the 60 to 70 dedicated volunteers from year to year. The atlas started in 2021. We're about to enter into our 4th year, and none of this work would be possible without our dedicated volunteers. So I'm really delighted to share where we are with the Atlas and what we're looking forward to in 2024 and into 2025. We probably will still have some focus surveys to do in 2025 as well. And then the link is shared here, and I'll share it several times during the presentation. But we're hosted by the Marin Audubon Society, so you can go to this link here to get all the information about breeding birds in Marin County. It's quite an extensive site with a lot of information. So I wanted to start out with sort of a fun fact about Marin County birds. Back in 1982, the Canada goose was actually considered a rare, very local breeder in Marin County. It was first documented breeding here in 1982. it only bred in one area of the county. So the whole atlas, it's divided up in a systematic fashion into what we call blocks. Each block is about 1,600 acres. And when they did the first atlas, the Canada goose was only recorded in one part of Marin County. Can you guess where? Well, if you guessed West Marin Island, you win tonight's prize. So believe it or not, that was the only place the Canada goose nested originally. From what we know, and probably many of you know a lot more about this, there was sort of a semi-captive flock that had been introduced to Peacock Gap at some point, I guess in the late 70s or early 80s. And so that was kind of the start of a breeding population in Marin County. And so since then, you know, you really can't go anywhere without hearing or seeing Canada goose everywhere. A little bit more about East and West Marin Islands, which obviously you guys are really familiar with, and you can see them very well from the Loch Lomond Trail at the marina. This has been considered a very important rookery for herons and egrets, snowy egret, great blue heron, black-crowned night heron. It's been an important rookery since about 1979. Although biologists started noticing in 2015, after 2015, they really weren't seeing the numbers last year and the year before. Biologists with the Audubon Canyon Ranch had not really seen any egrets or herons using the islands. There was maybe one great blue heron that nested last year, but we haven't had any herons or egrets there for a few years. Not really sure why. They could have just picked up and moved to another one of the islands in the San Francisco Bay Area, or there could have been some sort of disturbance, but the biologists so far don't have a reason for why the herons and egrets have abandoned this. But we're going to keep an eye out for this year and see what does nest there. We're going to talk some more about that in just a minute. So tonight, you know, Winifred gave a great introduction about what the Breeding Bird Atlas, what it is. You know, why do we do an atlas? We're sort of unique in California. Most states are doing an atlas. They do it at the state level. So for instance, New York State is doing an atlas right now. They're doing it for the entire state. We're kind of unique in California, I think, with all the different microclimates, and we're just so big that many of the atlases that are done here in California are done at the county level as opposed to the state level. We'll go over what we've learned over the last 3 years and as we focus on year 4. And then most importantly, we'll talk about how you can participate and the many ways that you can support the Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas. So this osprey, which nest here. So first of all of the birds that I'll be showing you tonight either nest, breed in Eastern San Rafael or Marin County. So most of the ones that we're focusing on tonight are local breeders breeding right here in San Rafael. And some are even photos that were taken from the very areas that I'm surveying, both in China Camp State Park and McNears and surrounding areas. So the Breeding Bird Atlas, if you think about it, it's a population survey project. It uses a grid-based system. So each one of the blocks for Marin County, we've got about 221 blocks. Each block covers approximately 1,600 acres. And the project happens over a defined time frame, in this case, 4 years, 4 to 5 years. You have volunteers that are going out. So in my case, I was the block leader for China Camp and for the area to the south. So we have block leaders for most of the blocks, not all. You'll see that in a minute. We go out, we count all the birds that we see. We record what type of breeding behaviors we're seeing, and I'll go over those in just a minute. You know, whether the bird's singing, is it carrying nesting material, is it feeding young? So think of the atlas as a tool to establish the breeding status of all birds in Marin County in a defined area during a specific time period. So this is a close-up of the areas that I surveyed: 1511 here to the north in China Camp, as well as 16-1, which contains China Camp, Peacock Gap, the Quarry Marshes and other marshes along Point San Pedro, McNears Park. And then some of you probably know Rusty Scalf. He's a leader for 1316. So that's the Loch Lomond area and all of the San Rafael shoreline, really down to Home Depot. So he's got that area. And we collaborated quite a bit on this block 16-1. But all of these blocks, Jane Medley had this block to the north and west of here, and Heller Stanton. There's another volunteer that's surveying Dominican, and then all of the city and county park as well on San Pedro Ridge. So the official survey period for the Atlas runs from July 15th. It runs from April 15th to July 15th. However, that, birds don't, and that was set up so that we could sort of accommodate the birds that migrate in the winter months to the tropical Americas, to Latin America. So those birds, like your Western kingbird, they're coming back later in the spring. That's to accommodate those birds that are coming in a little bit later. But as you all know really well, there are birds that are already starting. You're probably hearing the great horned owl outside your window hooting right now, or you've been hearing the red-shouldered hawk screaming in the mornings and evenings. So there's a lot of behavior that's going on now. So we'll talk in a minute about how you can contribute some of those observations to the Atlas. So obviously, as I said, volunteers are really the heart and soul of the Atlas. And as you can see, last year, we probably had our highest number of volunteers. So far, we had 77 block leaders. We had many other observers who participated. They've contributed over 5,000 survey hours. And as of the end of last year, they've submitted 275,000 individual bird observations so far. So why do folks do an Atlas? Like, what are we seeing with this Atlas? What's the purpose of it? Number one, we're identifying species such as this black oyster catcher that may have limited or restricted distributions, either due to habitats or climates or other things. Speaking of climate, with this changing climate, it's very important to have an updated Atlas compared to the first Atlas that was for the late 70s and early 80s. It gives us an idea, are species numbers stable or declining? And then, it's a fantastic tool for us, anybody that cares about birds, but especially those that are managing lands or stewarding lands in Marin County. It's really a baseline of information and knowledge that you want to start with. Now, it doesn't replace the need for a single species or some sort of a single species survey. If there's some new development that's going on or that's proposed, it can serve as a baseline so that whoever's working in this area, the biologist, understands the birds that are nesting locally. But you would always need to do a more focused survey or, maybe even a protocol level survey, depending on the species that you're concerned with. But it's definitely a great baseline, especially with our changing climate. So what have we learned so far? This is one of the species that occurs in eastern San Rafael. This is the Ridgway's rail. Also known as the clapper, was known as the clapper rail. This is a secretive bird of our salt marshes, tidal marshes, and can be found, from all along San Pablo Bay, really from Galenas Creek, China Camp, north to Novato. We have quite a few Ridgway's rails in eastern San Rafael. So there's a number of new species that have been documented breeding since the first atlas. What's been fascinating, including this peregrine falcon. So in addition to the peregrine falcon and the bald eagle, which, really really demonstrates the power of the Endangered Species Act and everything that's been done to, reduce the amount of pesticides that were things like DDT that were really impacting the success of these birds. They've really taken off. The bald eagle is now, nesting throughout San Francisco Bay, including Marin County, and the peregrine falcon is also, the numbers are going up. And also there's a American avocet is a wading bird, and we'll take a look at it in just a few minutes. But that's been very exciting to see some of these raptors numbers showing up again in Marin County. This is a bald eagle that I saw a few weeks ago flying over China Camp. So the bald eagles don't get the traditional white head, white tail. That doesn't usually show up for 4.5, 5 years. So up until this point, this bird could be a 2-year-old bird. So it's a possibility that this is a bald eagle that is a result of some breeding that took place actually during this Atlas period. So that's kind of exciting. We have bald eagles nesting to the north and south of our area. And just if you're comparing numbers, total numbers, there were 157 species documented during the first atlas. There's the time frames 76 to 78, and then 1982 versus 161 species today. We do have some species that have been introduced, such as the wild turkey, Eurasian collared dove. So there are a few species. There's a great-tailed grackle. It's not really introduced. The bird sort of introduced itself and has been moving up from Texas since the 1900s. It's kind of made its way into San Diego and then finally made its way into Marin County. So all of this data that I'm sharing with you tonight, it's preliminary. We still have a year to go, and there are several blocks, especially in the interior part of Marin County, where we haven't had full access yet. So there are places that we haven't been able to survey yet. So everything is rather preliminary from that standpoint. So breeding behaviors, what are the types of breeding behaviors that, we as volunteers are looking for when we go out and to look at birds? So I realize this is a pretty comprehensive list, but I just wanted to give you a sense. The whole process is really predicated on trying to identify the highest breeding behavior, getting the highest level of confidence that you can. So the goal isn't really to find every nest. That's not really the goal, but the goal is to document the breeding behaviors. And so it's everything from hey, I saw a great horned owl fly through my backyard today, to wow, that Anna's hummingbird got really excited when the other hummingbird came, really close to it and got kind of agitated, to, oh, wow, I walked outside today and there's a mourning dove. It's nesting right above my door frame entrance to my house. So those are the kind of things, this could be a whole presentation in and of itself. But this just kind of gives you an idea of, the different types of behaviors that we're looking at. And you can see all of these behaviors and go into really great detail and great depth about each of the behaviors in our volunteer handbook. So just last year, we published a volunteer handbook, and it's available on the website. And it has everything that you would need to know if you were going to be going out and doing these surveys. So now I want to focus on some of the actual species. So I mentioned that this American avocet, this shorebird, was newly documented in Marin County for this breeding bird atlas. I think at the time of the first atlas, they may have been seeing these birds in the San Francisco Bay Area, but they hadn't actually, at the time of the first atlas, they didn't have breeding records. So you can see here, you know, within the quarry wetlands and the Point San Pedro Road wetlands, we did have American avocets breeding. These wonderful photos of the chicks were taken from the Hamilton wetlands by one of our volunteers, David Sexton. So you can see that up here. And so all of the nesting data, we do have nesting data. We don't share the specific locations with the public, but you can look for a geographic area. You can go to the atlas. There's a portion of the atlas when you go to the web page, it says Data Explorer. You click on the Data Explorer and it will take you to a great series of maps that will give you an idea of volunteer coverage, species coverage. So you can click on any of the species. Like I said, sensitive species like the clapper rail or the ridgeways rails, northern spotted owl, bald eagle, those things, those species won't show up on the maps. If you do click on an actual block and go to the species list for that area, for that entire 1,600 acre block, you can then get an idea of what's breeding there, but we're not sharing the exact locations or the exact, any latitude, longitude for any nesting species. So these maps, obviously it's entire Marin County. So the blue and white stripes are the current atlas. The gray circles are places where a block leader, we don't have a volunteer for that block. That doesn't mean we don't have data for that block, because other biologists or other observers may have contributed data, since we don't have a dedicated volunteer for that block. So here's where it gets interesting. You can look at the American woodpecker. You go to the red and white, the candy cane striped areas. That's where the first atlas volunteers were seeing acorn woodpeckers. And then you can see with the places where it's red and blue, the species was seen again in the current atlas since 2021. But then you can see for this northeastern part of the county, these are all new observations of the acorn woodpecker. So it seems like its range has been expanding since the historical first atlas in the late 70s and early 80s. And keeping with the woodpecker theme, also looking at the pileated woodpecker, which is our largest woodpecker, you can see back in the first atlas, this area down here is Mount Tam. So around Mount Tam and around the Bolinas Ridge, areas of, thick forests, large trees, you would expect pileated woodpeckers to be there. They've expanded. I mean, here they are, kind of on the shoreline of Tomales Bay, and then moving north and east towards Novato. And one of my target species for this year, I believe I see and hear pileated woodpeckers all the time in China Camp State Park. I haven't been able to get it to a higher confidence, but I'm hopeful maybe with your help this year in 2024 that we'll get that probable or confirmed for China Camp State Park. Now, let's look at the western meadowlark. It's a beautiful bird. It's got the bright yellow breast with the black V, and more often than not, you're going to hear it singing. It has a beautiful song that really carries. Maybe you're hiking Loma Alta, Lucas Valley Ridge top. That's like a very classic area to hear this bird. This is a bird of open grasslands. So this has been interesting because the historic atlas, you can see, we were seeing it from the county line, from the Estero Americano, all the way into Mill Valley and Tiburon. And today, so where these blue stripes are, these are the only places where we've seen meadowlark. Now, that being said, there are a number of properties, the gray circles, where some of these places may have good grasslands, you know, maintained by their working ranches. So there may be great extensive grasslands that may have lots of meadowlarks. We just haven't been able to access those. So we are working with a lot of our agricultural producers to gain access to these lands. And we hope to be able to survey and get a better picture of what's happening with the western meadowlark throughout Marin County. But, you know, as you can see here, eastern San Rafael, you know, this whole shoreline down through the San Rafael Bay Trail down to Home Depot, Target, there were western meadowlark there breeding there in the late 70s, 80s. Now, you may see western meadowlark, you know, when you're out walking in the winter. We do have wintering populations, but then we also have a breeding population. That's what we're really focused on. So here's the American coot. This is also another rail type bird. It's in the rail family. It's very interesting. This is a local breeder. So we're not expecting them to be everywhere. If you've ever walked the Galenas Sanitary District ponds, you've probably seen them there. You can see Susan Kelly has that block, and she certainly recorded them as breeding there. But what was interesting is Eastern San Rafael had them breeding here back in the late 70s and 80s. So maybe this is something to keep an eye out for. I know Rusty has, you know, scoured San Rafael looking for many of these species, but this one just hasn't, you know, doesn't seem to be showing up along the southern south central portions of the Marin County shoreline. So thought that was interesting as well. So this is, you know, you may not be able to see all of this, but these are gadwalls and little ducklings. There were a number of birds that were not seen during the first atlas that we are seeing during the second atlas. So I just thought I would point those out. A lot of them, like I mentioned, the black-necked stilt, the American avocet, several raptors, everything from osprey to Cooper's hawk to red-shouldered hawks, screech owl now, great horned owl, a whole suite of woodpeckers, which is fascinating. And, you know, then a few other things like the pygmy nuthatch. I've seen pygmy nuthatch now all the way from Tamales to China Camp to McNears Park. So that's kind of interesting. They seem to be all in upper San Rafael neighborhoods as well. It's a small nuthatch, makes a happy little sound when it's flying from tree to tree. So here's the most important part. How can you participate? How can you support the Atlas and have the opportunity as you're out and about to see these Western bluebird fledglings, China Camp? So we do have what we call an incidental breeding observation web form. So basically anybody that is out and about, sees a breeding bird, can submit observations. Now, if you see an owl or you hear an owl, we accept any sightings for owls. If you're seeing other birds and you think that they may be breeding, take a look at the form. It's just a one-page Google form. It's very easy to use. But for all other birds, hawks, hummingbirds, shorebirds, ducks, eagles, anything else, the form is really set up for the probable or the higher confidence breeding behaviors. So that would be things such as courtship, obviously copulation, nest building, if you saw birds carrying nesting material or carrying food like this adult Western bluebird, or if you saw birds flying onto or off of a nest. Those are all things that you can submit through the form. The form actually allows you to upload photos. So if you have a photo you want to send or a vocalization, you can upload that as well. So anyone can use this form, and the link is provided there. You go to the page, there's 3 gray panels on the side, and there's a panel that's labeled submitting your data and observations, and that's the one you want to go to. So if you are really enjoy being out and can identify bird songs by ear, or you want to get better at identifying bird songs by ear, you feel like you have a pretty good idea of, a singing Bewick's wren versus an oak titmouse, and you want to learn more about bird behaviors, then this Breeding Bird Atlas is for you. You should have a little bit, you should be comfortable with some data collection and data entry. And then we're recommending as a benchmark 16 hours per season. So that's about 4-hour visits that are spread out kind of evenly between April 15th and July 15th. And if you really are interested about birds, or maybe you want to be a block leader for one of these unclaimed blocks, or maybe later in the year you want to go out and do some block busting. So that's a little bit different. That doesn't require that you sign up for a block, but later in the year, we're going to post some more information about some of these blocks that have, maybe they're 50 to 60% done. The volunteer just wasn't able to complete, their block this year. Something else came up. We're going to probably have days that we have set up where we'll just have a group of people, or, maybe you and your friend or spouse will go out together to some of these blocks and just get data during some of the prime breeding bird periods, like May and June. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that if you do have a love of birds and appreciation, then I encourage you to try to find a copy of Shuford's Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas. I was able to find a copy at a used bookstore, but it's also available via the Internet Archive, so you can just download a PDF or view it online. But as Winifred mentioned, it really is a treasure for anyone that appreciates birds and just natural history of coastal California and Marin County. It's just really, I can't emphasize enough what a fantastic resource it is. And you can learn so much about our breeding birds from this first atlas, this publication. It was published in 1993. So let's now talk about some of the birds to watch for. So these species are all species that are starting to breed now, especially the owls. The Allen's hummingbird for us in this part of San Rafael, it's probably just starting to show up. So if you're familiar with eBird, if you use it, I would encourage you to use it if you would like. I find it a very helpful tool. But I can take a look at it, and it can give me records, any records that have been posted, in the last week or the last 10 years. And this Allen's hummingbird is now starting to arrive. And it was in Mexico. They're starting to show up on the coast, like in Bolinas, but now I see they're starting to show up in Larkspur and San Rafael. So unlike the Anna's hummingbird that is all green, this one's going to have the cinnamony color, it'll still have green on the back. This is the male, so the male will be a lot easier to detect. And it also makes an amazing sound with its wings. So if you hear that, that's something that's very distinctive, and it'll stand out. And you may have them coming to your yard, so you probably know better than anyone, if you have them. If you do have them and you see them doing their display, you can use the incidental web form to submit that, because that is one of those species that we'd like to get to a little bit higher confidence for the atlas. So the great horned owl, we know we have lots of them in China Camp. It'd be not, if you have them in your neighborhood, please go ahead and submit them so we get a better idea of how they're spread out through Eastern San Rafael. The barn owl, I have not heard the barn owl in Eastern San Rafael. I don't know if there's enough real open area country for them anymore in Eastern San Rafael, but if you do happen to hear them, please let me know, or please submit an observation. they can give a blood curdling scream that's kind of hard to miss. So if you're familiar with that species, you'll know what to listen for. So what are some other species that we want to keep an eye out for in 2024? So we mentioned Westmoreland Island. Westmoreland Island is also a possibility for black oyster catcher. We see black oyster catchers all the time along Loch Lomond Marina. That's where that photo was taken. So the bird on the left is an adult black oyster catcher. We see pairs, we see, you can see 4, 6, 8 birds sometimes along that Loch Lomond trail, sometimes more than that. The thing to keep an eye out would be this summer for juvenile birds. So the juvenile bird you can see is a little bit different in that its bill's not that bright orange. It's still got a little bit of black on it, and the plumage is maybe not all black, but that's to keep and the eye is darker. It's not the orange that you see in an adult. So that would be another thing to keep an eye out for. Certainly biologists from the San Francisco Observatory that'll be surveying will be keeping an eye out. The other thing is the great blue heron. You could scope or look through binoculars from the Loch Lomond Trail and, look across to see if there's any great blue heron, see if any show up again. Of course, whatever we do, we never want to approach these birds or approach the island during nesting season. And the other thing as part of the atlas is we never use playback. So we're not using tapes or any of these things to try to draw the birds out. That's not it's not allowed, and it's prohibited actually by federal law. The other 2 species that I think you guys can really help with would be the hooded oriole and the Bullock's oriole. So I've definitely documented hooded oriole flying actually from China Camp to Peacock Gap. So the hooded oriole, you may know, is really famous for nesting in our Washingtonia palms and our fan palms and different palm trees. So it would be great to have more records and maybe better confidence about the breeding status of the hooded oriole. These are both bright orange, yellowish birds, as you can see. They're robin-sized but thinner. You can see the hooded oriole as well as the Bullock's oriole. These are the males. Obviously, they have longish, thin bills, pointy bills. The male hooded oriole has the black chin, and it just goes. It has that black at the throat that's pretty distinctive. Whereas the Bullock's oriole has more of the orange. It's kind of what was at one time called the Baltimore oriole, and then they split them and they said, okay, well, the Western ones that we used to call Baltimore oriole are now this Bullock's oriole. So the hooded oriole is really a fan of neighborhoods, goes after those fan palms. In fact, during the first atlas, the Dominican College area was just like the place to be for hooded orioles, because they had all those palm trees. And so Central San Rafael has always been a real hub for the hooded oriole. So they haven't started showing up yet. They're still south, but when they show up, they'll show up sometimes to hummingbird feeders. They'll go to hummingbird feeders. They'll go to other long tubular flowers to feed. And then the Bullock's oriole, it's going to be out more in the oak savanna type habit. It's not going to be, maybe it could be in the neighborhoods, but it tends to be more out. Think Stafford Lake and those big oak savannas that you see when you first start walking through parts of I'm sorry, thinking of Mount Burdell. So those oak savannas that cover the slopes of Mount Burdell. So I have not found Bullock's orioles, but I haven't been to all of the best places for them yet in China Camp State Park. So would love to hear from all of you. If you're seeing any orioles at all this spring, please let us know. So then also there's the Western screech owl. It's been a few years, but I would hear Western screech owl walking past the Quarry Marsh. So we know that there are western screech owls. So if you all are hearing them or suspect you have them nesting, as it looks like this one was roosting in this box, but if you have an owl box or some other box and you actually look out there one day and there's, a pair of owls or better yet, maybe some chicks, let us know. And then American goldfinch. So that's interesting. So the lesser goldfinch, which is also sort of canary yellow, we do have those breeding. We've had numbers of them breeding and nesting throughout China Camp State Park. We'll hear the American goldfinch. This one's just sort of a test for you because this is sort of their non-breeding plumage. But the key with the American goldfinch is you can see the thicker wing bars. So the thicker bars on the wings, they're going to turn a canary yellow once they get into, March and April and get into breeding season. And then right underneath the tail is white as well. They're going to have a little white part underneath the tail. So this American goldfinch, both in the Central San Rafael block, as well as the McNears and China Camp block, we don't have this species to breeding, to, a confident breeding status. So we could use some help with the American goldfinch as well. And then finally, if you're walking the shoreline, so the area from Loch Lomond, down towards the Home Depot and Target, the past couple the past couple years since 2021, we haven't seen any killdeer yet. So Rusty's been out at Pickleweed Marsh and those areas looking. We haven't had any killdeer. This is an adorable little killdeer chick photo from Len Blumen. And then pied-bill grebe. These birds are certainly nesting at the Galena sewer ponds. They're also sort of a localized breeder because they'll use little ponds and marshes to nest in. But we haven't seen any at McNears or the Quarry Pond marshes or any of the little ponds south of there, like south of Pickleweed, so the Spinnaker ponds or any of those. So please be on the, keep an eye out for pied-bill grebe if you think that they might be nesting, or if you're lucky enough to see their chicks, which are adorable, and that they actually carry them around on their back for a little while. That would be an exciting new sighting for a breeding observation for San Rafael. So finally, none of this is possible without our project team. So Marin Audubon Society serves as our fiscal sponsor. We're grateful to them for the support. We have terrific coordinators. Diana Humpel and Daphne Hatch are helping to lead this effort, along with Susan Kelly, who's our volunteer coordinator. Not all of this can be done by volunteers. We need additional support. So we do contract out with Point Blue Science. Right now we have a part-time project manager, Hillary Allen. With 275,000 observations, we really need somebody to be on point with quality assurance, quality control, data management, data review, data analysis, and being in communication with volunteers about their data. So that requires funding, and we're grateful to all of our donors that are helping to support the project. Then William Whiskies is actually one of our volunteers who happens to be an expert at data and geographic information systems, or GIS. So he has actually developed and curated the fantastic Data Explorer feature on our website, which allows you to look at, where species are in Marin County. And it also allows you to see how species are changing during the season as well. So as data comes in, the Data Explorer is updated. So as volunteers, as community members, you can go there during the breeding season, especially from April through July. You can see updated data for your area each week, each month. So we're very grateful to William for that, but we do have a contract with him. So in addition to his volunteer work, he does have contracted work that he does for the Data Explorer. And that's really important because those maps are really, those are the ultimate product of the atlas, is to have a map showing you all of the breeding birds throughout Marin County. So we couldn't do it without his support. So I wanted to just thank you all tonight for your, caring about Marin County's birds. If you want to learn more about it, again, here is the website. So, welcome you to explore and tinker around. And then if you're interested in volunteering, please send us an email. Like I said, we're going to have events later in the year, probably for some focused block busting. But if you take a look at the map and you see a block that's unclaimed, looks like an interesting area. There's a lot of areas in Point Reyes, National Seashore, that are still unclaimed. Just let us know. And then most importantly, if you're out and about and you see those hooded orioles or Bullock's orioles or any of those other species that we kind of briefly touched on tonight, please submit breeding records to the Atlas. That would be most appreciated. And if you're feeling like it and you want to donate and support the Atlas financially, we also have a way for you to do that. There's a PayPal button, but then there's another number of other ways for you to contribute financially to the Atlas as well. So I really am grateful to Winifred and Bonnie and to Steve and Janice for encouraging me to come out and make a presentation to you tonight. And so I guess with that, I'll stop sharing and we can talk birds. Oh, I've turned purple. Hold on. Okay, not really sure why that happens.
Well, that was fascinating, Liz. And I think what we're going to do is open it up to questions now. Before we do that, there was a comment from one of the members of the Wetlands Committee, Arlette Cohen, that wanted people to know that you can get the original atlas. You can borrow it from the library, from the San Rafael Public Library. You may have to wait a little bit, but you can put your name on there. I do that a lot of times, and they'll let you know when it's available. You just get in the queue. So you might want to consider doing that if you don't want to invest in it. And
let me add a couple of points so people know how to ask questions. That's okay, Winifred? You're muted. You muted yourself. Wait.
Yes, please do, Alan.
So 2 ways to ask questions. One is you can use the chat function, the chat indicator. I direct you because some people have asked a couple questions and they were directed to me and I'm not the right person. So please make sure when you type in a question on the chat, you direct it to Winifred. She's kind of going to handle those and then pass them on to Liz as appropriate. The other way to do it is if you want to ask a question verbally, you don't want to type it in, which you're free to do. I ask that you use the raised hand icon. There's either a specific raised hand icon at the bottom of your screen where your other controls are, or depending on the version of Zoom you have on the app, you might have to click on the reactions icon and get the raised hand from there. That will raise a hand on the screen, which I can see, and when Winifred can see, and if she wants to call on you, I'll indicate that you can unmute yourself and ask your question. So either way.
Yeah. Okay, well, there's one question here, which is, are there any birds that you expected to document breeding and did not?
Yeah, so the American goldfinch is a good example, and the Bullock's oriole is another one. And then certainly there are a number of species that I would just like to get to higher confidence. But you can take a look at, there's a nice table in the Data Explorer. There's a table, if you go to 15-11 or 16-1, you can look at a side-by-side table comparing the Shuford list to today's list. So then there you can get an idea of what exactly is breeding.
Okay, that's a good tip. Yeah, I just wanted to also tell everybody, if you can't remember the website, if you just go to Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas 2, it will come up on the Google search. And if you go to that page, it's just chock full of very well organized information. And you can even, I believe, download the report from 2023. Is
You
that, I
can
think that's
download the
on there.
report from every
Yes.
year since 2021, 22, and then the latest report from 2023.
Yeah.
That's right.
They even have a little video about from William Wisk about how he arranges to how he does the topography and the data explorer, which is pretty interesting if you like data and technology, and even if you don't, he explains it very well. So I have another question about the spotted owl. Someone says they're pretty sure. Arlette said she heard a spotted owl here in Peacock. Have there been any breeding bird observations?
So we have had observations kind of right next door along the San Pedro Ridge area. So one of the things that we also are working on that the data manager from Point Blue is helping us with. So we're also working with state parks, Ring County Parks, other county partners, the National Park Service. So they also have biologists that are doing regular surveys for species such as the northern spotted owl. So one of the goals that we have this year is to bring in data from a lot of these partners, including Marin Water and One Tam, and start to bring that into the Breeding Bird Atlas.
Okay. I'm wondering, do you give people recommendations about what they can do to attract birds to breed, such as boxes? I know there's very particular types of boxes, nesting boxes, and they're designed for particular types of birds.
So we don't necessarily do that as part of the Atlas, but there's certainly a lot of information, available online. I don't know if Marin Audubon Society. So Marin Audubon Society is definitely a great place to go to if you want to learn more about birds. They offer field trips all the time. So it's a really good place to, whether you're a beginning birder, an intermediate birder, you want to get better at birding. There's trips all the time. And a lot of those trips are with the volunteers that are also leading a lot of the Breeding Bird Atlas.
Okay. I know I use Merlin. I think a lot of other people do because it can identify birds by their calls. It's really helpful. And do you think it's a very accurate app?
So
in your
we
experience?
use it with a grain of salt. So it's sometimes helpful, especially this time of year. The birds can have so many different variations. The Bewick's wren can have something like 22 different variations of a song. So it can be helpful to kind of give you a sense of what's in the area, but we ask that our volunteers try to get a visual on the bird or, try to get repeated, vocalizations before just saying, like if you're not familiar with the vocalization and all of a sudden you hear the brown creeper and you're like, you haven't heard it before. It's good to verify that, go out a couple times before just going off of what you get from Merlin. But, obviously it gets better all the time, right? People are submitting thousands of observations every day. And one of the new things I noticed with Merlin now is that they include a little photo of the bird when it comes up with the vocalization. So that's helpful too, to kind of help orient you.
Yeah, and then I guess also sometimes if you're already aware, it might be one bird or another. It helps to narrow in. I find that with I'm not really sure, and I'm pretty sure, but that kind of gives me the definitive information I need.
Yeah, it can be helpful that way.
Yeah.
And then, maybe you see it fly away or
Right.
you're lucky enough that you get a good observation and then you're like, okay, that's definitely a Bewick's wren I was hearing.
Then somebody asked, what is fecal? I don't even know what this is, so I'm glad if you can explain. I'd be happy if you can explain it. What is fecal bag carrying?
Okay, so especially with woodpeckers or a cavity nester, the fecal sac, the birds will have a little sac of, waste. And so the parents will pick it up and they'll carry it out of the nest to dispose of it. So when you see that, they're doing a little bit of housekeeping there. So, but that's related to the nest. So that's what the carrying of the fecal sac is, of the
Okay.
baby bird fecal sacs.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. And then somebody asks about, what are the ramifications of maybe an increase in certain birds, but they have an impact because they may be predators on another type of bird. For example, the specific examples that bald eagles might be responsible for scaring off egrets. So there is that kind of impact on the ecosystem.
Yeah, there's always those kinds of impacts. And, that's the importance of the atlas, to be able to take a look. I mean, it's not getting specific at that, but it's good to know because, today we only have a certain limited number of habitats. You all are focused on wetlands. We know that wetlands have declined significantly in the Bay Area. So unfortunately, that kind of impact could be more likely with loss of wetlands and rising sea level rise. So, those are kinds of things. That's why it's important to document this in the atlas. But yeah, naturally there will be, expansions over time, maybe with some certain species, and then other species, maybe a decrease, but it could be to a number of factors.
Yeah, yeah. That just happens sometimes as a byproduct of one species being more successful than another. Just as the natural course of, animals adjusting to
Natural
their.
course, but definitely within the face of habitat, significant habitat alteration. So yeah, there's just a lot more pressure on birds now.
Do you do any correlation with the other count? There's these more general bird counts, like the Christmas bird count. There's a lot of bird counts that people participate in. I participate in. Do you exchange information with them? Does that help inform your study at all?
So the Christmas bird counts are very informative, and it's a database that goes back over 100 years, but it's not necessarily of breeding birds. It's just all the birds that are here over the winter, because, obviously San Francisco Bay is a major stop on the Pacific Flyway. So we count those birds for other reasons, but certainly we are collaborating with a lot of other local agencies that are doing their own breeding surveys. So, we're collaborating and communicating with the other agencies that are surveying birds, including other nonprofits like Audubon Canyon Ranch, who's out counting and surveying all of our herons and egrets.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. So I'm going to thank you so much, Liz. It was such an
Thank you.
interesting presentation. I learned now how to identify the juvenile black oyster catchers. Maybe I've been seeing them and I just haven't even been looking for that little nuance of, like, not the bright orange beak, the slightly less bright orange beak. And so I'm going to look more closely.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity this evening. And yeah, I hope everyone just has a greater appreciation for Marin's breeding birds. And it's, yeah, it's a great way to really learn so much more about our local birds, just taking this time. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so as Liz said, if you want to go to the site, Marin County Breeding Bird Atlas, and the website is up there. You can go, you can get more information, you can donate, you can volunteer in any capacity. You don't have to feel overwhelmed or underwhelmed. If you want as much or as little as you want to do, could really be a significant contribution to this impressive project. And I want to thank Liz, of course. I also want to thank Alan Shavitz, because he's the behind the scenes man that makes these presentations run so smoothly. So thank you, Alan. I want to give a big thanks out to Kathy Lentz, who always designs wonderful flyers to promote these events. And also just our invaluable members of our Wetlands Committee, like Steve and Janice Barlow, that have been putting up owl homes in their backyard. And they reached out to Liz to begin with, and Arlette Cohen and Roy Falk, and Bonnie is very involved with all this. I hope some of you will be inspired to go out and see some of these birds and maybe participate in this last year of this 4-year project. And there's links here if you want to copy anything down, just to make it easier for you going forward. And I think that's it. So thank you again.